From Newsmax TV, Florida proposes an immigration enforcement law that the state's chief law officer says goes beyond Arizona's. Saying Florida will not be a sanctuary state for illegal aliens, Attorney General Bill McCollum makes the announcement in Orlando. Let's watch.
I think most of you know that I support the Arizona immigration law, and in fact, as Attorney General, have gone to court to protect its constitutionality. Today, Representative Snyder and I and the other representatives who are here are coming before you to announce a bill that's been drafted, one that Representative Snyder intends to introduce in the next session of the legislature, that will create for Florida its own law, but an Arizona-style law. And we want to go over that with you today, what's in it. First of all, the law will mandate, or the bill will propose to mandate, that police officers, when they make a stop, detention, or arrest, have to check to see if somebody's status is legal or illegal. Currently, they're permitted to do so. It's voluntary. They also, at the time they stop or arrest somebody, have to have a reasonable suspicion that that person is an illegal before they make that check under the mandate in this provision. And there is a specific area in the bill, a specific provision in the bill that says there shall not be any racial profiling. There won't be any way that somebody can go and just, hey, decide I'm going to go check on somebody because they look like they might be an illegal. There has to be something like, for example, a driver's license is altered or no papers or whatever. But this mandate is at the heart of this bill, and it's the very first thing. Secondly, there are a couple of misdemeanor crimes that are created in this bill. One of them is for not carrying your papers. If you're here in a status and you're supposed to have papers to show you're here legally, and then if you don't have them, that's a misdemeanor. Or if you're soliciting employment and you don't have a legal status to be here, that will be a misdemeanor under Florida law when this bill's passed. There are several provisions that are in the bill that are not in Arizona law. And in fact, when we finish with this, and Representative Snyder, you get this bill passed and we get it signed into law, Arizona's going to want this law. And the reason I say that is that, here, let me go over a couple of these things that are in here. First of all, we will allow judges to consider a defendant's immigration status when setting bond. I think that's very important right now. That's not the case. That's not required. But if you think about it, somebody is more likely to flee the country if they're here illegally and they've committed a crime. So that's one. Secondly, we'll create a sentencing enhancement for illegal who commit another criminal act in Florida. If you commit a crime and it's say grand theft, then under these sentencing enhancements you go from perhaps a third-degree felony to a second-degree felony simply because of your status as an illegal. And that is a deterrent that we really want in this law in Florida. And third, it allows the Attorney General to sue any official or agency who implements a policy that restricts the enforcement of immigration laws. Under the Arizona law, citizens can sue. Under our proposal, we think it's more prudent to have the Attorney General have the right to sue. We also require that Florida businesses use E-Verify to ensure that people that they hire are authorized to work. And we have in this law a safe harbor provision that says that if businesses do make this check, call up the Immigration Service using the E-Verify system, and are told that somebody is legal, and then they later discover, or somebody does, that they are not legal, they're protected from being fined or whatever because of the hiring of somebody who's illegal. So I think we both get the job done with regard to businesses being required to use the E-Verify system, which is a new federal system that allows them to check when they hire a new person. And also we give them an out if they've checked and in fact find that they are legal, or at least they're told that, and then later discover they're not. I think, again, this is a law that is overdue in Florida. It's something that is important, and it's something that we're very proud of today. Representative Snyder, this is your bill. Would you like to say a couple of words?
Excuse me. Thank you very much, General McCollum. It's a privilege to be here with you all this morning. Thank you for coming out. I'm flanked by several of my friends from the Florida House. The General has already graciously introduced them. And perhaps that's the first thing to say to each of you as you begin to look at our draft language, which we're releasing. I'm one person in the Florida House, and there are 119 others of us. There are 40 senators and a governor. So I think the basic point as we begin this morning is this is the beginning of what I think will be a fairly long and sometimes emotional discussion. And so it will be my goal as we move this draft language forward to obtain the support of my fellow members in the House, my colleagues in the Senate, and of course ultimately the governor of the state of Florida. This bill has come about because of what I sense and what colleagues of mine sense is enormous pressure from the citizens of Florida that their elected state officials engage in a leadership role in addressing what many people in Florida believe is a burgeoning and continuing problem with illegal immigrants being in our state and being involved in public safety issues and human rights issues, and really a whole range of issues that we in government, we as elected officials, need to address. The Attorney General has highlighted some of the new points in our bill. We believe that we've addressed some of the concerns expressed by the federal judge in Arizona. I'm sure you'll have some questions about that. And some of the things that that judge ruled on, we will not be fixing in our draft language. Because frankly, I personally, along with very competent legal staff in Tallahassee, do not agree with the premise of some of her ruling. We've acquiesced where we could, but for the most part, we've stayed strong. We've produced a bill that I believe, if enacted, will go a long way towards resolving some of the problems that we have today.
We're about ready to take questions. I want to emphasize one other thing for you. This is a law not to expand the powers of local police to go out and just enforce immigration laws. It is about immigration, and it is about the fact the federal government has not done its job, and it's true it hasn't in Florida and elsewhere. But we have a lot of behavior out there that's not right. When somebody is stopped and detained and there's reasonable suspicion that they're not here illegally, then they should be detained. They should be taken into custody and they should be deported, which is what the federal law says. And we can do that today. The only question is, are we going to mandate that there be a check to find out under the conditions that's in this bill? And that's really what this is about. And as you can tell, we've done a lot of other things with it as well to enhance sentences, to do the bond opportunity for the judge to use that as in consideration, things that we think will make a big difference in Florida law when somebody is arrested who is an illegal, and hopefully will deter people who come in here, a lot of them coming in here trafficking drugs in our state, quite frankly. So that's what this bill's about. Do you have questions about what it is?
General McCollum, how does this draft get past the central tenet of Judge Bolton's ruling in Arizona that immigration is, or that federal immigration law trumps any state law?
Well, her ruling in that regard, I don't think is right. Obviously, that ruling's being appealed. Ultimately, she hasn't made her final ruling, but it's sort of everybody's understanding of where she's coming from, and we're party to that. The state of Florida filed, along with Michigan and other states, a brief in support of the constitutionality of that law. And the fact is that we are mirroring federal law. We believe, and I believe, that the states have a constitutional right to police. We have the police powers, not the federal government. When the Founding Fathers granted certain enumerated powers to the federal government, they didn't grant general police powers. They gave them a specific power to write some immigration laws, but not to say, hey, that the federal government has the exclusive right to enforce the laws in the sense of policing them, which is what we're doing in this case.
Mr. McCollum, you addressed it a couple times a little bit, this concept of must have a reasonable suspicion, and I know you have some provisions in there. I haven't read it myself yet.
Yeah, right.
Would a reasonable suspicion include struggling with the language or speaking with an accent?
No. No, it's very, very clear that racial profiling is not permitted as a consideration in this. It's not how you look. It's not what you say in terms of your language or characteristics or national origin or any of that. That's clearly spelled out in the bill. We're doing everything we can to make sure people that that is not the order of the day. And in fact, that's not the way police operate today. And remember, what we're doing in this legislation is doing a mandate of something that police already have the authority to do in Florida. And I think that's something we ought to all make sure. We're not changing any of the existing guidelines. We're simply codifying them, and we're simply mandating that when you stop, detain, or arrest somebody that you have a reasonable suspicion that they're an illegal, then you check. And a reasonable suspicion, again, it could be the driver's license looks fake. I mean, clearly there are plenty of times police and highway patrolmen have found that. Or it could be because of something else that the person says during the course of the arrest about their status themselves. Oftentimes people admit that. It could be any number of things, but not the way they look, not the way they sound, certainly not that. Another question.
What about if someone's speeding and a cop pulls you over for speeding? I mean, they're doing something wrong and they pull them over. Is that grounds then to be able to check your immigration status if you were going 65 and 55?
If there's a reasonable suspicion, that the person's an illegal, reasonable suspicion meaning, again, not simply because of their language or their race or their national origin, but the driver's license looks fake. I mean, there are a lot of fake driver's licenses out there. And when a highway patrolman pulls you over, it's not, he takes that driver's license. Usually he goes back and checks to see if his check with NCIC, which is the national check to see if you got an arrest record and all there. He also is looking at that driver's license. Today, our driver's licenses in Florida, as you know, have all kinds of things embedded in them to make it very difficult to counterfeit. So it's pretty easy to tell a fake driver's license. And that would be the most common thing.
Gray area, don't you think, on it? I mean, it opens up an awful lot of questions.
Well, just remember, all that we're talking about in the worst case scenario is that he makes the call to ICE on the telephone, which is what's required, and say, hey, I got this guy's name's whatever it is, and here's his background and record of what little information I have. Is there anything that shows that he has a legal or illegal status? Can you tell me? That would be all that we would do.
Can you walk us through the rest of that process? What happens after that? An ICE agent goes up and will take that
Well,
person into custody if they don't have the proper-
normally what happens if in fact somebody is an illegal, the police officer detains that person and detains him for the benefit of the ICE agent coming to pick him up at some point. It's the federal responsibility to take custody and deport somebody. Now, on the other hand, if it's an arrest which is involved, you're booking the person is going to perhaps go through trial and then be sentenced, and we've enhanced the sentences in here. And there may be a period of time where there are deportation proceedings that are going on at the same time the criminal proceedings are, but the state of Florida's criminal laws would be enforced. That's the first thing that would happen. So there are a couple of different scenarios here. The arrest for a crime would result, of course, potentially in the prosecution of that crime. A separate crime. We're not talking about an immigration crime, a separate crime.
General, you says they must carry immigration documentation or face a misdemeanor. You don't have your papers on you? Does that mean you get arrested and you face a misdemeanor? You have to have one law.
Well, that's a federal law today, and we're mirroring federal law. Would become a state law so that instead of it having to be tried for a misdemeanor for, 20 days, I think, in jail, you would have to face that, or you could face that in Florida as opposed to going into federal jail. That's all, the only difference. But it is currently against the law today not to carry your papers in all states, all 50 states.
You mentioned that this law has some differences between this law and the Arizona law. What would you say would be the major differences between this and Arizona?
Well, first of all, we cleaned up the technicals that Representative Snyder was talking about. Wherever the judge said it wasn't clear that reasonable suspicion had to be there, we made sure that it is, all the way through the process. The arrest procedure everywhere. If you don't have a reasonable suspicion that somebody's illegal, you don't make the check under the mandates or anywhere else. Secondly, we've done the provision I mentioned earlier that Representative Adams talked about, and that's allowing judges to take into consideration your legal status in setting bond. If you're an illegal, the odds are you're more likely to flee. I mean, that's just a fact. And so we're going to permit that to happen under this law. Third, we have a provision in this law that is going to have an opportunity for sentences to be enhanced. Right now, there are a lot of different ways where when you go to court, certain acts trigger a higher sentence. If you're an illegal and you've committed a crime of grand theft, for example, or whatever it happens to be, then it'll be 1.5 times what you otherwise could receive as the minimum or the mandatory punishment under the Florida sentencing guidelines. So you're going to significantly have a longer stay in prison in Florida, potentially, if you are an illegal immigrant and you've committed a real crime, which is what most of this is about.
Help me, I haven't read the bill either, but I keep going back to this reasonable doubt. I think we're all kind of confused about that.
Reasonable suspicion.
Reasonable suspicion, excuse me. Does it spell out what is reasonable suspicion? So it's, because you do get into a gray line about racial profile.
Well, reasonable suspicion is a term of art in law, and it's very well known what it is, and it's practiced all the time. But in addition to that, we have a provision in this bill that prohibits racial profiling, that prohibits you to an officer to consider race or national origin or any of those things. So I think that's pretty clear, and we don't have that happening today. People ask me in Miami about things like this, and I'll turn to them and say, look, You know, you have a very high number of Hispanics and minorities that are police officers in this city, and we do for that matter in Orlando. They're not going to go out and abuse this. Racial profiling, none of us want to see happen. And that's why I originally opposed the very first version of the Arizona law. It was too vague. They amended their law. It's fine now. We've improved it in this bill a lot. This is our own law, not theirs. And I think when we're done passing this law, Arizona's going to want our law. They're going to want to pass our law because we're better, we're stronger, we're tougher, and we're fairer.
Last question, guys, then we'll get to Hispanic
What
sound.
is tougher than Arizona law? You think Arizona's going to want it? What is it that they're going to want other than maybe being more clear about reasonable suspicion?
Well, they're going to want the provision on enhanced sentences. They're going to want the bonding provision. They're going to want the provisions that allow more leeway when it comes to some of these things than we have today. I also think that they're going to want to change their law. I think it's wrong to allow just anybody to sue, which Arizona does today, to enforce the laws against sanctuary cities, for example, or governments that come along and say, we're going to allow or permit illegal status just as a matter of fact. Our law will say the Attorney General can do that, but not just everybody can do it. I think that their law is too open to trial lawyer abuse. Our law is very tightened up in that regard.
And real quick, General, there are some critics out there right now that question the timing of all this. Obviously, we're getting closer to primary election day. Your opponent has supported the Arizona legislation for some time now. Is this the reasoning why you're coming out with this now, this push for this bill?
Well, we worked on this bill. Representative Snyder has proposed working with us and came to us, and he can talk about that, some time ago in this whole Arizona discussion. I said, yes, my office would be glad to work with you. It is his legislation. He can talk to you a bit about his timing on it. But part of it was dictated when we're announcing this by waiting for the decision in Arizona, the court decision, so we could make these corrections to whatever degree we can to make sure that our law complies and we don't have any loopholes in it or any issues of minor technicalities. But I'm going to let Representative Snyder talk about timing. It's really his timing that dictated this.
Thank you, General. As the chairman of the Civil and Criminal Justice Council in Tallahassee in the Florida House, I can tell you there's a lot of considerations that go into timing, and there's a lot of tactical reasons. I've had calls both from the Senate and from colleagues in the House. People are wanting to see draft language. Frankly, you all have been asking for draft language. And so there were a lot of factors that went into the timing of releasing the draft. And I really do think it's time now. We want to see what the appeals courts do in Arizona. We needed something in paper that represents Florida's views. We needed Florida to stake out a position in this area. And that way, as we move the process forward, as I begin engaging other committee chairs, other members in the House, I actually have something that I can take out and say, this is what we're working on, and it's time for people to start weighing in. You all will have a great opportunity now to take a look at this language later on and call, I'm sure, for follow-up questions.
Just a quick question about the economic impact on this. A lot of groups are threatening boycotts of Arizona. Isn't it a little dangerous for a state like Florida that relies on tourism to do something like that?
You know, there are a lot of people who are emotional about laws dealing with immigration, and we can't control those, but what we can do is control our borders. We have today something I mentioned earlier, and I don't know if I've emphasized it enough. We have a lot of trafficking in cocaine coming in here from Texas, Mexico, really is where it's coming from. It's Colombian cartel and Mexican cartel driven. There was just an arrest in Central Florida this past week of several illegals who've made their third run in here in the past month or two with cocaine in many quantities, large quantities of kilos. They distribute them to our street gangs, our criminal gangs, which you know we have task forces on. In Orlando alone, last year, Office of Statewide Prosecution has been prosecuting a criminal gang that was almost entirely comprised of illegals who came here and have connections to Mexico. They came here to traffic in these hard drugs, these cocaine drugs. So this is a very serious matter for us in Florida right now for that reason alone.